Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining us today for this Mountaineers Books web event as part of our Be Well virtual series. I am Tess Day, I'm the publicist for Mountaineers Books, and today's presentation is Grow Your Own Victory Garden with author and master gardener Bill Thorness and Jules Arvin from Tilth Alliance. We are so glad that they could be here with us today. Little intro about them. Bill is a gardener and writer who has been doing both in Seattle since the mid-1980s. He has written 2 gardening books for Mountaineers Books imprint Skipstone, Cool Season Gardener, and Edible Heirlooms. He writes for the Seattle Times and regional publications. He is a master gardener and coordinator of the King County Seed Lending Library. Bill's so happy to have you here. Jules is with us as a Garden Hotline educator at Tilth Alliance. Garden Hotline is a program sponsored by Seattle Public Utilities and Hazardous Waste Management in King County. As a Garden Hotline educator, she answers emails, phone calls, and has in-person conversations about sustainable gardening practices, edible food gardening, and anything else plant-related. One of her favorite aspects of her work is hearing and seeing other people's gardens and gleaning ideas and inspiration to then share with others. Jules, we are so glad you can make it today. So for the audience, feel free to use the chat feature as we go along, but if you have a question for Bill or Jules, please use the Q&A option below. We will be monitoring it as we go, and of course, answering some questions at the end as well. So on that note, I am going to hand the reins over to Bill.
Thank you, Tess. All right, thank you all for coming and joining us for this webinar today. Before we get started, I just want to acknowledge that, we're all going through a very difficult time. At least we can go through it together. It's hard mentally to be at home, to be stuck in a routine that is reduced from your normal, maybe dealing with difficult work and children's situations. And, gardening and getting out in the yard, doing a little forest bathing in your backyard, I think of this as a way to just cut the stress and escape from that limitations that we're working under and living under right now. So thank you for coming. I hope you get a lot out of this today. And I'd like to tell you a little bit about how this is going to work. We're going to talk about starting your own victory garden. We have a few polls we're going to launch during the webinar, and then we'll take a look at the results of those polls, asking you a few easy questions, no studying necessary. I'm going to cover in 4 short topics of 5 to 10 minutes each, choosing your site for your garden, preparing the soil, deciding what to plant, and then starting veggies from seeds versus transplants. Now, some of you may already be going on these things. Hopefully it'll be a reminder, and there might be some new material as well. So I love that we have Jules from Tilth Alliance here. I've been a longtime supporter of Tilth Alliance, and the Garden Hotline is a great resource year-round. So Jules is going to help me answer your questions as we go along, and include some comments as well on a couple of these topics. So thank you, Jules, and thanks for the Garden Hotline's involvement. Why don't we launch that poll number 1, can we, producers? Going to ask you a little bit about what your level of knowledge is about edible gardening. We'll only have this open for a couple minutes, so please just click on it, and then we'll take a look at the results. We have been working in our gardens in the Maritime Northwest for a couple of months now. If we have gardens here, the gardening can begin in March here in our cool maritime climate that doesn't get as much cold weather or snow or freezes. And it starts kind of with looking for weeds and getting the garden set up with a good start on deciding where you're going to grow things, what's growing where now, and if you grow year round, as I do, picking some winter vegetables. So it's been going for a little while in some parts of the country, and I know there are people logging in from other places. I'm sure you have different levels of preparedness at this time of year, and hopefully everybody will be able to get going pretty soon. Can we take a look at the results from the poll? How are people doing on responding? So I have 3 people who said, "What's a garden?" Love that. Beginning, casual, experienced. Nobody clicked, "They should be teaching this class." Oh, come on, guys. I'm sure there are many of you. Okay, so let's jump into the first topic. Thank you for the poll. We're going to do a few more. The first topic is choosing your site. And do we have the screen share started right now? We can skip that for now and go back to it a little bit later if you'd like. So, choosing your site in your yard are to the questions of, let's stop the screen share for now, can we? Okay, thank you. You want to think about a few things if you're going to choose a site for a new garden space in your yard. Where the sun is, what kind of access you have to it, and access to the materials you'll need to keep the garden growing. So vegetables, edibles, they want as much sun as you can give them. So 4 to 6 hours of sun is great. More than that, if you want to grow tomatoes and peppers and hot crops like squashes. But lettuce and salad greens and brassicas like kale and cabbage and broccoli, those will grow in 4 to 6 hours of light. So how do you figure out how much light your garden is getting? Well, there's a couple of ways to do that. You can every day go out at the same time of the day and see where the sun starts to hit your garden. So if it's hitting that garden at 9 a.m. and stays in the garden until 3 p.m. before the trees on the other side of the street start to block the light, then maybe that's a great spot for the garden. You might also look at where the weeds sprout first in your garden, because the weeds are going to be very opportunistic. Where things are growing the best, where is the best lawn portion in your garden? You want to cut out part of your lawn and make it a garden bed? Well, choose the most lush part of the lawn. I know that's a horrible thing to say, but put a raised bed where that grass is, and you'll get a lot more food out of it than you would get the relaxation of sinking your toes into the grass. Just leave a little patch of grass to do that. So where do the weeds sprout first in your garden? That's where it is warming up and drying out earliest in the season. And that's where you're going to be able to get a good start on your spring garden. When I talk about access, I think about how easy is it for you to visit. There's a garden landscaping design idea of zones in your yard, where the first zone is a place that you visit all the time. The last zone is way out in the back 40 where you never get to. And you want one of the first zone areas in your yard to be your vegetable garden, because, you know, there's an old saying that the gardener's shadow is the best fertilizer. And what that means is the more you're out in the garden, the better your garden is going to grow. So if it's easy for you to get to and you're walking by there every day and you're stopping and you're checking things out, you'll see the bugs, you'll see the growth, you'll see when things are ripe and ready to be picked, and you'll get more out of it, and you'll get more enjoyment out of it. And there's a large part of gardening that is just the enjoyment of seeing things grow, and marveling at kind of the diversity of nature in your yard. So where the garden is also should be a place where you have easy water access, where there's a hose bib from your house, where you can leave a garden hose coiled up nearby so that you can water easily. Or hopefully if you're gonna put in a drip irrigation system, that you can connect that up easily to your garden hose or to your hose bib that's available nearby. Also, think about bringing in amendments, soil amendments. We're going to talk about building soil in a minute. And so these bags of compost are heavy. So hauling in a bunch of bags of compost to a garden bed that's way back in the backyard from your steps that you have to take up to your house from the driveway and then go around the house and then get it back. Really, I mean, just put it in the driveway or somewhere nearby, so that you can haul those soil amendments when you need them easily and quickly and without too much effort. Water, easy to visit, easy to haul in amendments. And then the last thing to consider, which is maybe the first thing to consider, is what type of garden are you going to have? If you're an apartment dweller and you just have a little patio, and you're going to have some pots on the patio, that's fantastic. You grow stuff in one pot and you're a gardener in my book. And you should read my book. It's quite lengthy. Anyway, also, if you just have a patio where the best sun is in your yard and big trees around in the rest of the yard, but you have a nice sunny patio, put some pots out there. Even root crops like beets and carrots can grow in pots if the pots are large enough. And certainly tomatoes, peppers, any kind of salad greens, brassicas, a lot of our vegetable crops can be grown in pots if they're large enough. And then if you want to think about renovating part of the yard for a vegetable garden, think about use the Maria Kondo style of, what sparks joy in you. If the lawn sparks joy, leave the lawn. If the vegetation, the shrubs spark joy, leave the shrubs. If they don't, if they're struggling, if they're not the right type of thing for the plant, for the place that they're in, consider taking those out and then putting your garden there. So Jules, I want to bring you into the conversation a little bit. I'm sure you get a lot of questions from people as to, how do I start my edible garden? There she is. Hello. And so how do you answer, tips from the garden hotline, just saying where to locate their garden in their yard?
Yeah, it depends a little bit on what people are wanting to grow. But say you are an edible gardener, some advice that I share is start out with 1 or 2 plants. And really understand how those plants grow. And then once you get comfortable and familiar, start adding more things. So I actually brought a plant to share today.
Great.
So this is a radish. So we'll see if you.
Oh, so cute.
And this is one that I really enjoy growing. It's a pretty fast plant to grow. Within 30 days after that seed, you should be harvesting. Doesn't work the first time. Throughout the growing season, you can try again and again.
Yeah, I mean that's a great tip. Also, to not bite off too much at any given time, because if you decide you're going to tear up your whole lawn and put in a giant garden, and then you just want to plant 1 row of radishes, the rest of that is going to be weeds for a while. So just do 1 raised bed, or just do 1 section for now, and then expand later. Grow a few plants. That's a great idea. Carla asks, what about the parking strip? What do you think about parking strips, Jules?
Yeah, I think it is a great space. Depending where you live, I would check with the city to see kind of the rules and regulations. I'm familiar with the city of Seattle and submitting a permit, but just checking to see. But it's a great space.
Yeah. I would say also, if you're on if you're on a very busy street, that you might want to consider the types of crops that you grow, because there is a lot of pollution from cars going by. And so leafy greens, for instance, that might take up a lot of that airborne particulate matter from exhaust. You might not want to grow leafy greens, but you might be able to grow an apple tree, which is up off the ground, and you can wash those apples and clean them after they grow. So yeah, think about that. And but we see a lot of raised beds in parking strips in Seattle. You might also think about people walking their dogs, and you want to protect your garden from the dogs getting into the garden or doing their business in the garden. So a raised bed is great for that. A fence is great for that. Something that, and a little sign that says, please curb your dog somewhere else.
Yes, and then
Make it nice. Be nice. It's Seattle. We want to be nice. So
thinking about water.
and yes,
as well as how, if you do plant in a parking strip, how often will you need to water, and then how will that water be brought out?
how are you going to get it there? I mean, a vegetable garden, a good rule of thumb is you need 1 inch of water a week on your vegetable garden. When you're growing from seed, you need to water almost every day to keep that seed bed moist while things are sprouting. So that can be a big undertaking. Great suggestion. Thank you, Jules. Let's move on to preparing the soil. So I want to share some slides on this topic for a few minutes. Preparing the soil, how do you know if your soil is ready to be gardened in? Well, scroll back, if you would, to the first slide of some nice leafy greens. Back a little bit. There we go. One more. This one. Okay, stop there, please. Here's a really easy test to find out if you have a garden bed already. Here's an easy test to find out if that garden bed is ready to receive plants or seeds. Dig up a scoop of soil for about 6 to 8 inches deep, and take a ball of soil in your hand like this and kind of pack it together, and then hold it in one hand and throw it up about 8 inches in the air. And when it comes back down into your hand, you catch it. And if it sprays apart and it's all dispersed around, that soil is dry enough for you to plant. If it goes plop and drip, 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 and your hand gets all wet, it's too wet to plant yet. So we need the soil to be dry enough to plant. I want to talk a little bit about how to improve your soils. If you've been growing year round, you might be using what we call cover crops, or you might have a bunch of weeds in your garden, which you could call cover crops, as long as they don't have seed heads on them. Many of the weeds that grow annually in our garden, before they get seed heads, could be just chopped up and dug into the soil, which is what we do with cover crops. So this is a picture of fava beans in the center and some other cover crops around them. Oh, stay back in that one, thanks. So this is some variety of cover crops, and usually it's purchased as a blend and you grow it over the winter. It helps build the soil by keeping the moisture in the soil and keeping the winter rains from leaching out the nutrients out of the soil. Now, at this time of year, it's going to look like this, perhaps, a whole mass of greenery. So you want to chop those things down. And the little box in the corner is the different kinds of cover crops you could grow. You want to chop your cover crop in at this time of year. So you chop these down. If it's way too much biomass, you put most of it in your compost bin. It's really great in the compost bin this time of year. It's a lot of nitrogen in these green plants. And you combine those with carbon, which are dried woody plants or dried leaves, green and brown together to make compost. But as a green manure or a cover crop being chopped in, it is going to add a lot of nitrogen to the soil. And nitrogen is that thing in the soil that is going to help your leafy greens and plants start to make new leaves. So go to the next slide, please. You chop this stuff down. I usually use a flat hoe on the right there to chop it up into small chunks. And then I use a garden fork, which is on the left, stuck into the soil, to dig it into the soil. Then I let it sit for a couple of weeks before I plant into it. It'll break down over a couple of weeks, and then you can plant your vegetables into that. And as you plant, if you find leftover parts of the cover crop, just rake them out and throw them in the compost pile. So one of the concepts that we talk about in organic vegetable gardening, and I'm really only going to talk about organic today, is feed the soil, not the plants. We are trying to create really great soil so that the plants have a great medium to live in. And a great soil is alive. They call, Elaine Ingham from Oregon State University called it the soil food web. And it's a web of bacteria, fungi, little microorganisms that are living in the soil, and they actually keep that soil alive. They keep it aerated so there's air in it. They bring the nutrients to the roots of the plants so that your plants can be fed, and they take nutrients from the plant roots that the plant shares with them. So it's a symbiotic relationship. And once you've started your edible garden and you have it going, you have a great soil food web there. This chopping in cover crop is like ripping the roof off of your house. And if you've ever been in a hurricane or a tornado or something, I mean, that is catastrophic. So the only time we really recommend completely digging up your garden bed, if you have an existing garden bed, is if you have all this cover crop in it. Otherwise, if you have an existing garden bed and you want to plant into it, leave most of the soil alone, dig a hole, plant your plant, or dig a row and plant your seeds. And then the soil food web survives around where you're planting. So let's see the next slide. So some of the crops in cover crops will actually grab nitrogen from the air. This is a legume, and the legumes on their roots will capture nitrogen and store it on their roots in these little white nodules. So when you dig that up and you're going to chop it into the soil, you're releasing all of that nitrogen that's been stored right away. It doesn't have to break down at all compared to the leaves. The leaves have nitrogen in them too, but they have to break down. So it's another reason to grow cover crops, and it's just a very visible way that you are getting free fertilizer out of planting this kind of a crop. So that may be for next year, or if you take off a really big bed this year, this spring, and you only want to plant in part of it, put the rest of it in cover crops for the spring. Let's see, how about the next slide? This is the most wonderful worm bin in the world. So you can, here's an Earth Day, Earth Week tip. Start your own worm bin and keep your kitchen scraps at home and use them again for free fertilizer. This is not my worm bin, but I wish it was. Tilth Alliance has a plan on their website to build a rectangular worm bin that is really wonderful plan. I've built them a number of times. They last 5 or 6 years, just made out of wood, easy to build. And you put bedding in there, you put a particular type of worm called red wigglers in there, and then you put your kitchen scraps, except for meat and dairy, and the worms eat it, and the worm compost that comes out of that is really great fertilizer for your garden. So right now at this time of year, I'm digging around in the edges of my worm bin and pulling out all the worm fertilizer to use when I plant my plants. Go to the next one, please. Keeping a regular compost bin for everything else other than kitchen scraps is also a great idea. You're lowering your carbon footprint. Instead of sending away all of your garden trimmings and lawn trimmings and leaves, in a yard waste bin, you can just compost them on site and put them back into your own garden. If you get the temperature in your bin above 80 degrees, and you can buy a compost thermometer, then you will be aerobically composting the material, and it will compost fast and give you compost in a couple months. So it's equal parts of brown and green, mixed together really well, chopped fairly small, and then watered consistently so it's nice and moist. And in a 3 foot by 3 foot by 3 foot cube is really the smallest that you'd want to consider for aerobic composting. If you don't have any of that, just make a pile in the yard and throw everything in there. Do not throw in noxious weeds or running weeds like blackberry or bindweed, but or weeds, seed heads and weeds. Those things still go in the yard waste bin, but a lot of other stuff can just go in this compost bin. So think about that as another way to sort of close the loop on your gardening practices a little bit. In the short term, let's see what the next slide is. Forgotten my slides. Thank God for the producers doing the tech part of it. I want to talk a little bit about fertilizers. Before I talk about fertilizers, we'll leave this slide up, but I want to talk about how to improve an existing garden bed with compost that you could purchase. So here in Seattle, we have Cedar Grove Compost, which is our municipal compost organization. They'll take those garden trimmings from you and take them away and sell it back to you as compost. Compost is really great for improving the soil because it improves the tilth of the soil, or the water holding and nutrient holding ability in the soil. And it also adds organic matter, and organic matter is what's needed for that soil food web to live. So you can add a couple of different Cedar Grove products. One of them is called Booster Blend, which is compost and manure. The other one is called Veggie Garden Mix, which is compost, sand, loam. These things you can purchase and buy. Here's a good primer. If you're going to start a new garden bed, maybe 2 to 3 inches of compost on the top of the garden bed, and then dug into a level of 6 inches. If you have an existing garden bed and you're just going to refresh it for the spring, maybe 1 to 2 inches of compost, and then plant right into that. Don't dig it in, but just do what we call top dressing of compost. So for a 4 by 10 foot bed, this might be a standard size garden bed, 4 by 8 or 4 by 10. 3 bags of compost, like Cedar Grove compost, 3 bags of manure, well composted manure, which you can buy at the hardware store or nursery, and 1 bag of the sort of super compost. You'll see more expensive compost that has, like, it says mycorrhizae fungi in it, or beneficial organisms in it, and it'll be a lot more expensive. Just 1 bag of that to sort of feed that soil food web. Spread that out evenly over the garden, and then dig it in, and that would be a good start. So if you have a blend of compost manure like Cedar Grove, you would just use that Booster Blend 6 bags on a 4 by 10 foot space. I hope that helps as far as a guideline. Let's take a look at a few of the questions, and Jules, you can maybe just jump back in here. We're going to answer plant questions, crop questions later. If I'm adding compost, what time of year do you recommend doing that? Now is great. And as you plant is great. So maybe whenever you get started on your garden, get some compost and put it in. Let's see. I have a 100 square foot community garden, considering planting things in a planter in our balcony. How do you recommend planting to make the most of a small space in containers? We're going to talk about that in when we talk about what to grow, and we're going to talk about spacing and ideas to get the most out of your small garden. Can you plant immediately after tilling in the cover crops? No, you want to let those things break down for a week or two first. How about the grassy areas? Grass keeps coming back if I cut it. Jules, you want to take the grass question?
Sure.
I like to give her the hard questions.
It depends. If this is an area that was grass before and you're converting it into a garden space, one technique I like to use is sheet mulching. So I actually did this at the house that I'm at right now. Is I laid cardboard and newspaper and then put compost on top. And I actually did that in fall, and then it decomposed over winter, and then in spring I had a space that I could plant, so the grass decomposed as well.
Let's go to the next slide for a second, because I actually have a picture of sheet mulching from the Tilth Alliance demonstration garden in Wallingford. So there it is.
Awesome.
Exactly what she's talking about.
Yeah, and in this picture, I think they use leaves, which is also a great resource.
Yeah.
Compost or leaves on top.
Or weeds, or anything without noxious weeds.
Yes, yeah, weeds without their seeds. Would be great layer to add on top.
Yeah.
And I actually do have a few spots in my garden where I didn't sheet mulch and my grass keeps coming back up. And I hand dig it out right now if I see it come back up.
And digging it out, I mean, for something like if you have blackberry from a neighbor's yard, or bindweed or grass coming into your garden, really the organic gardener's method is to put elbow grease into it and dig it out. And one of those big garden forks that's tall and you can put your foot on and sink into the soil and then sift the soil, that's the best way. Are there perennial cover crops for the Seattle area? Yeah, it's called grass. No, I'm joking. There are perennial cover crops. You know, normally I use cover crops to dig into the soil, and so I wouldn't leave them as a perennial. But a lot of things like crimson clover is a beautiful one. That will go to seed, and then it will come back if you just you'll have to put up with the time in the summer where it has gone to seed and died out and dropped its seed, and it'll be all brown. But then in the fall, it's going to all sprout and it's going to come up again. Mm-hmm. Let's see. If I have a garden that was full of shrubs, how do I compost those? Jules, you want to field that one?
I have pulled all the weeds and added compost. Is it a new bed? I think I would say it is a new bed. It depends a little bit if it's ready for planting. So I think it depends if the roots have been able to decompose or if they need more time to fully break down. And so I would say dig out the shrubs if you can, or giving them time to decompose. Yeah, most everything can go in the compost bin if it does not have weedy seed heads, or if it's not too big to break down, you know. So maybe the diameter of a branch up to, you know, the size of your finger could go, I have to be careful there, could go into the compost bin. Other stuff is not going to break down. But okay, I want to move on. We have a lot to cover, so I will keep going. And the fertilizer picture, the previous picture, let's go back to that just for 1 second. When you go to the nursery, backwards, there, thank you. When you go to the nursery, you're going to see a bunch of fertilizers. And there's a lot to know about fertilizers. The basic thing to know about it is that there are 3 big numbers on most fertilizers. The thing in the front says liquid, and it says 413, I believe, or 415. The feather meal says 1200. That's the NPK numbers. Those are the major nutrients in fertilizer: nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Nitrogen is the green growth of your leaves.
phosphorus is roots and fruiting support, and potassium is overall plant health and lots of other stuff. So look for those three numbers. Look for the organic logo. So on the Dr. Earth picture on the right, it says OMRI. There's an organic standards logo. Down to Earth also has is organic, and EB Stone says natural. Look for the organic logo. Natural doesn't mean as much as organic. On the left, there's 2 bags of lime. So in the spring in Seattle, we will often lime our soils in order to bring the pH into a balance better. We get winter rains that will kind of leach the soil, the nutrients out of the soil, and make it more acidic. And vegetable gardens like a balanced pH in 6.5 to 7, so you can rebalance the pH with lime. And you always with all these fertilizers, follow the directions on the box. Look for organic and look for the type of fertilizer that you really want to use based on a soil test. And a soil test is a great thing for a long-term understanding of your garden. I'm going to send out a link, and I know the Garden Hotline fields a lot of questions on soil testing. I'm going to send out a link to everybody, participants, with a few links to soil testing. But once you know what's in your soil, then you can figure out what fertilizers to purchase. We need to move on to deciding what to plant. This is, and there's the get sprouting. Oh, let's leave it on that for a little bit. Deciding what to plant. What do you like to eat is the basic question. What you like to eat and what your kids are going to eat and what is going to grow well for you is your basic decision tree on how to decide what to plant. I'll give you a few primers though. Right now in Seattle area, the soil is warm enough and the climate is warm enough to be able to grow cool season crops, spring vegetables, such as peas and lettuce and broccoli, and root crops like carrots and turnips and beets. It is still too cool here. And there's the radish. I'm not a huge fan of radishes, so I don't remember to think of them. But I do love the black Spanish radish, but that's another story. If you read Edible Heirlooms, you'll see all about the black Spanish radish. So the spring crops right now, but it's too soon to plant summer crops like tomatoes and peppers and squashes. The soil needs to be warmer for some, like beans to sprout in the soil. They need to be warmer. Need to have a warmer soil. You can get a soil thermometer and find out. And some of the things you're going to start in as indoors or in a pot and then plant out in the garden. I don't recommend doing that for root crops like beans and beets and carrots. And I don't recommend doing that for crops with really tender roots like squashes. I will often plant the squashes out in my garden, just the seeds, and then cover them up and keep them a little bit warmer with a cloche so that they'll sprout better. Getting a little deeper into year-round gardening. And consider how much space you have. And a couple people asked about this. The amount of space that you have is going to determine what you can grow. One big, giant broccoli plant that's going to give you one head of broccoli is maybe not the best choice for a small garden. But maybe you want to grow peas up a trellis on one side. And if the trellis is kind of an A-frame shape, underneath the peas in that A-frame, you could grow a lot of lettuce, for instance. If you grow a teepee of beans, pole beans, you could grow squash under the pole beans. So think about companion planting in that way to get more out of your garden. And then, and then think about what you really like to grow and want to grow. Cherry tomatoes are a lot easier than big tomatoes. You get a lot more of them. They're easier to grow. They'll start earlier in our short season. And but if you really love a big slicing tomato or paste tomatoes for sauce, then commit some space to that and just really study on how to get the best tomato out of your garden. I recommend a book called Epic Tomatoes. It's not by a gardener from around here, but it's fantastic deep dive into all things tomato. I also, this is a great point to talk about the Maritime Northwest Garden Guide, which is a Tilth Alliance book. And it is month by month telling you what to plant in the garden and when and how. It'll tell you a little bit about cloches and cold frames and when to use those, how to warm up the soil with those in advance. And Jules, well, I was the editor of this most recent edition of the Garden Guide, and I love doing that. And we have a lot of resources in there. What do you tell people about the Garden Guide, and where is it available? You've got one in your hand, I think.
I do. I have one right here.
There it is.
I really enjoy using the Garden Guide. One of the sections that I really like is they have a planting calendar. Oops, I've used it so much that the page just comes right out. And it's a month-by-month guide. Yes, sharing information about when to start seed or starts. And it's available on the Tilth Alliance webpage, tilthalliance.org, and they have a store section where it's available.
And it's available in bookstores. Any local bookstore can order that for you. And it's also PCC Community Markets usually carries it. The nurseries will carry it. So especially if you're just learning how to garden in this climate, please get a copy of that. You will not regret it. Do you want to end the screen share for now? That is a pea sprout, by the way, that picture we were looking at. How much space you have, you can also do a couple of other techniques to make the most of your small space. One of them is called interplanting, where you can plant one row crop. Maybe you have 2 rows of onions that you want to plant. You plant the onions, and in between that row of onions, while they're still small, you could set out a whole bunch of lettuce starts. By the time the lettuce has grown up and you're eating it, you can pull them out of there, and the onions will be able to fill in that space. You can also succession plant, where you plant maybe half a row of carrots right now, and in a couple of weeks, you plant the next half of the row. Then you'll have a longer harvest of carrots, and you won't have so much all at once, which gives you more out of your garden over the year. And you might consider perennials in your garden. Herbs are great perennials, parsley, sage, rosemary, and thyme. Except for parsley, they're perennials. And parsley is a biennial, and if you let some of them go to seed in the second season, it makes a beautiful flower. It'll just drop its seeds, and you'll have more parsley next year. And artichokes, asparagus, rhubarb, these are all perennial vegetables you can fill your garden with a little bit. So that's a bit on deciding what to plant. I want to touch, let's just check the time. I want to touch just a couple minutes on starting veggies from seeds versus transplants. And that's where we could go back to the slideshow for a few minutes, and I'll just click through a couple of slides that will touch on that. So let's go to the next slide. So when I get my tomatoes from the nursery, they might have tomatoes, small tomatoes available this time of the year. Do not plant them out in our garden this time of year. They'll shiver. Their leaves will turn kind of purple around the edges. That's not good for the plant. Better to keep them indoors and then pot them up. If you buy nursery plant that is in a 4-inch pot of a tomato, you could pot that up into a gallon-sized pot and keep it growing indoors, and then give it a really good start on growing its roots before you set it out. This is me potting up a tomato into a 4-inch pot. I start them from seed, and they're just little tiny guys. And then I very carefully move them from the little seed packet, a little seed plug, into a 4-inch pot, get it into the pot, and hold it just by those seed leaves on the edge while I put in more soil and compost around it. So for something like tomatoes or peppers, potting them up and keeping them indoors a few more weeks until they get really strong roots is a great technique to get the plants off to a good start. Next slide. Oh, here are the tomatoes all potted up into gallon-sized pots. I like to grow a lot of tomatoes. This was a crazy year. And take a look at the soil on these pots. Notice how it's kind of a sort of a lighter brown or lighter gray soil. And maybe the one right in front in the middle is a darker, almost black soil. When you have these crops indoors, you have to really pay attention to the watering, and you want the surface of the soil to just get a little bit dry and lighten up in color before you water again. Don't drench them every day, just thinking more is better. I have a finger test for the soil moisture level. Stick your finger into the soil. You do it in a pot or into the ground. And if the entire finger comes back moist, then you've got moisture all the way from the surface down a couple inches into the soil. Do not water. If it comes back to the first knuckle, the surface of the soil is dry, but from here on down, it's moist. That's perfect. If it's all the way down to here and there's no moisture on your finger when you pull it out, then you've waited too long. So think about watering again when that first level of soil is dry, and then you just have moisture on the bottom part of your human soil probe. Okay, so next slide, please. And then we'll go to a few questions. Oh, here's a picture of a trellis for peas, and you can see there are greens growing underneath the trellis. Next slide. And here is a little box of peas, an old window sash that has been repurposed into a bed for peas. This is Lorraine Edwards Faulkner's garden, and she wanted to grow fall peas, so she didn't have a place in the garden. So she has this box that she made out of old windows and put a bottom in it, and planted the peas. And then she just picked up that pot and moved it over to a place where she could put it in the sun with a trellis behind it to grow the peas up. So that's another way to get more out of a small garden. Let's see, that might be the last one. Another slide. That's the last one for now. So we can end the screen share for the moment, and we'll just go on to the final thoughts on seeds versus transplants. Jules, where do you recommend when people ask you, where do I get seeds or starts? Where do I get seeds or plants? What do you guys tell them these days?
Yeah, that's a common question we've been getting. Yeah. And the answer has been changing. And I would say check with your local nurseries. Some are still open. It varies day to day kind of operations. I know some are doing online orders while others have a time you can sign up online and actually go into the store. And then also there are some plant sales coming up as well. I would say just check with each organization. Check for sales that you've gone to before to see if they're doing them this year. Tilth Alliance is having their plant sale. It's online this year where you pick up in person. And I know Bastyr University as well as another one. For seeds, I would say, and this one is a little bit tricky. A lot of seed companies received a lot of orders. So they've actually stopped giving seeds to home gardeners and are focusing on farmers and commercial locations. But I would say this is a great time to connect with your local community. Facebook, Nextdoor, and reach out to your neighbors and gardeners, because a lot of time people will get seed packets, but they won't use all the seeds. And so they might have some that they can share.
Yeah.
And I don't know, Bill, you have, for seeds as well.
And we're gonna, the links I'm gonna send you in an email after this shows all of the bioregional seed companies and links to their websites. Some of them are still filling orders, but it will take a couple of weeks to get the orders. We'll also have a link to the King County Seed Lending Library, where I'm the coordinator. We have worked out for Northwest Seattle a virtual order system where we have a database of seeds that we have online, and you can order up to 10 different kinds of crops off of that. We will fill the order twice a week and put it in a pickup spot for you. So you'll get an email back saying, here's the pickup spot. It's only in Northwest Seattle. We're maybe going to roll it out to our other branches, but it's an experiment right now. Yes, talk to your friends and neighbors. This is seed sharing is one of the wonderful things you can do as a community. And if you share the seeds, then when you're going to buy some next year, you're going to buy fresh seed. And really, seed that's more than 2 or 3 years old is probably not going to sprout well. So you want to use it anyway while it's fresh. So thank you. There another plant sale coming up, the Master Gardener plant sale. They have only edible plants this year, vegetables and herbs, and it's going to be in Bellevue at the Bellevue demonstration garden, and at the Cesar Chavez Community Garden on Beacon Hill in Seattle. So go to the Master Gardener Foundation of King County, mgfkc.org, and you'll see the dates when you can order in advance and then go pick up, just like with Tilth Alliance. So there are going to be other Master Gardeners and other greening organizations doing their own plant sales. So look for those as well to fill it out this year. Let's end by taking a few questions. Let's take a look at the chat and see the Q&A and see what we have. What are good companion plants for tomatoes? What should stay far away? Do you want to field that one?
Yeah, I can talk about some companion plants that I've done. I like to do lettuce near my tomatoes, mainly because the tomatoes will provide them with a little bit of shade, and some of my lettuce varieties are ones that can grow in that environment. And cilantro as well are a couple that I have used. Yeah, what about you, Bill?
Well, I plant marigolds around my tomatoes. You want to attract beneficials to all of your flowering and fruiting crops. Tomatoes are self-fertile, but especially with the cherry tomatoes, where you've got a lot of flowering going on, you could get extra pollination from the pollinators. So planting flowers around your flowering edible crops is a great idea. There is a sort of a theory of companion plants versus sort of enemy plants that don't do well next to each other, and you'd have to, that's a little deep for this conversation, you have to drill down and find that. There's a book called Carrots Love Tomatoes, maybe? There's a book on it. Check that, and please support your local bookstore. Let's ask for another question here. What is a cloche? Oh, I love the way you spell cloche. It sounds, Evelyn, looks sort of German. A cloche is, the next one is spelled the way we spell it, C-L-O-C-H-E. It's a hoop house covering. Generally, it's a plastic sheeting that you cover your garden, like me covering my head, with hoops and plastic. And under that, the garden will be warmer, it'll dry out sooner, and you have to pay more attention to watering if you're going to use a cloche. So it helps you grow warmer season crops in our cool climate. And I spent a lot of time and effort in my book, Cool Season Gardener, talking about cloches and cold frames and giving you some plans as to how to build them. So if you want to look at that, you'll find out a lot more about that and how to use them and when to use them.
Mhm.
Covered domes are kind of for the seed cells. Yes, keep them on when the seeds are germinating. As soon as you see the seeds poking through the soil, take that plastic cover off of the seed tray, because that will let the air wash over the seeds and the bed, and it will prevent a problem that we call damping off, which is a fungus that attaches through moisture on the stems of the seedlings. It'll attach to that stem and it will shrivel up the seedling stem right at the soil level. So get good air circulation on the seedlings as soon as you see them coming out of the ground, coming out of the soil, and that will prevent that problem. Let's see,
It looks like, Bill, that we're a couple minutes to one.
yeah. Let's look for one more question.
And then can I share how people can contact the garden hotline?
Oh yeah, please do, because that's where all of these questions and many more could be answered. Let's end on that. I'm sorry we couldn't get to more of your question. It's we would love to, and you're going to get a follow-up email with links and things, so that'll help a lot as well.
Yes, and so the garden hotline, it's a free resource for residents of King County. And you can call or email with any question. So the phone number is 206-633-0224. And the email is help@gardenhotline.org. And I had my little magnet just to make sure.
Oh, look at that. Oh, perfect.
I think it shows it backwards maybe.
No, it's perfect.
Okay.
Just right. All right. Well, let me see if any last thing that I wanted to share with you. We just had the 50th anniversary of Earth Day yesterday. I hope that and this and any other kind of gardening kind of projects you're thinking about will inspire you to spend some time out of doors wherever you can in your garden. Reduce your stress by digging and planting and growing, and have a great blooming gardening season. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Bill and Jules from Tilth Alliance. You guys really were just wonderful and so helpful today. And thank you to the audience for joining us. Just to reiterate, if you guys are interested in purchasing Bill's book or any of our books, right now on our website, mountaineersbooks.org, if you use the code TIMETOREAD, all strung together, you'll receive a 25% discount on any book. Don't worry, if you don't have a pencil or pen, we will email you the code in a day or two with the links in the follow-up email. We will also certainly include the garden hotline's information, so you guys can contact them for all your gardening questions. And just as a reminder, Mountaineers Books is a 501c3 mission-driven nonprofit. We are supported by a combination of book sales and philanthropic support, which has become ever more important in this really uncertain time. So please consider purchasing a book from our website or from your local independent bookstore, or by simply making a donation if you are able to help us continue publishing our award-winning books about the outdoors, conservation, and sustainability lifestyle. That being said, we are continuing these Be Well virtual series web events. We will have two next Thursday, April 30th. The first one is Rain Gardens for People, Salmon and Orcas. It's a We Are Puget Sound web event. We'll be at noon. It will be featuring Zofia Pastor. She's the author of Rain Gardens for the Pacific Northwest, as well as Mindy Roberts, contributor to We Are Puget Sound, and Aaron Clark from Stewardship Partners. And the second event next Thursday will be at 7 p.m. that same day with Kelly Brenner. She's a naturalist and also the author of Nature Obscura, A City's Hidden Natural World. And she will be in conversation with Wendy Walker with Seattle Audubon. So again, thank you all for your time. Bill, Jules, thank you. In the meantime, we hope you guys are staying safe and finding ways to enjoy all that the outdoors has to offer during this time. So enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.